The candles had been burning for about 40 minutes when Marcus reached under his chair. I noticed that. Most people at the table didn't. They were passing the cranberry sauce, refilling glasses, doing what people do at Christmas dinner when the food is good and the wine is better. But I noticed, because I have always noticed the things that don't fit the rhythm of a room. 50 years in rooms where the wrong move costs everything will train that into a person. He pulled out a manila envelope, standard letter size. The clasp was already open. He set it on the table beside Claire's plate, not handed it to her, set it, the way you set down something you want to appear casual about. Then he said her name once, quietly, and when she looked at him, he said he was sorry that this wasn't how he'd wanted to do this, that his attorney had already filed and that she would be taken care of. The condo, a fair settlement. His word, fair. Claire didn't open the envelope. She just looked at it. Her wine glass caught the edge of her wrist when her hand moved, and it tipped, didn't fall, just tipped, and the red crept into the white linen like something slow and patient that had been waiting for its moment. Nobody moved to blot it. The room had gone the particular kind of quiet that isn't actually silent. I could hear the candles. I could hear the pine wreath above the mantel releasing its smell into the warm air. I could hear Marcus's colleague, a man named Garrett, who had no business being at a family Christmas dinner and knew it, set his fork down with the exaggerated care of someone who has just realized he is witnessing something he cannot unknow. Marcus's mother looked at her plate. Marcus's father looked at Marcus. Marcus's brother, Theo, looked at me. I looked at the candles. I did not stand up. I did not speak. I picked up my glass, and I took a slow sip of the Bordeaux I had brought from my own cellar, the one I'd been saving for something worth opening, and I thought, 14 months. That's how long it had taken him to build this moment, layer by layer, document by document, dinner by dinner. He had forgotten to research the man sitting at the other end of the table. That was always going to be his problem. Before I continue, a brief word about who I am and why you should take what I say with whatever measure of trust you decide I've earned. I am 73 years old. For most of my working life, I made it a point to stay out of photographs and off of lists. I was reasonably successful at both. The names in this story have been changed to protect the people who deserve protection, and frankly to protect a few who don't, but whose attorneys charge more per hour than I care to spend on principal alone. Everything else is as accurate as memory allows, which, in my experience, is more accurate than most people find comfortable. If you're watching this, I suspect you understand something about staying quiet in a room while you figure out exactly what is happening in it. Those people seem to find this channel. I've noticed that. Tell me where you're watching from. City, country, whatever you're comfortable with. I'm curious. Now, back to Christmas dinner. My name is Edward. I spent the first half of my career as an industrial engineer, and the second half doing what people politely call private equity, which is a clean term for a complicated thing. I built 3 companies from manufacturing licenses at a time when most people my age were still trying to understand what a leveraged buyout was. I am not telling you this to impress you. I am telling you this because it explains something about how I see the world, which is to say, I see it in systems. Inputs, outputs, incentive structures. Who benefits when a thing goes wrong? I've been reading those patterns for 5 decades, and by the time Marcus sat down at my Christmas table, I could read them in my sleep. But I want to tell you about Claire first, because this story is about her more than it is about me. Claire was 9 years old. The Christmas we stayed up until 2 in the morning assembling a wooden model of a steam locomotive. It was a kit, 63 pieces, a hand-painted red finish, gears that actually turned if you seated them correctly. I had bought it thinking we put it together in an afternoon. I had underestimated her considerably. She would not stop. Every time I suggested we leave the rest for morning, she looked at the half-finished thing on the kitchen table and then looked at me with an expression I can only describe as calm refusal. Her mother had been asleep for hours. Snow was coming down outside the window in that slow, purposeful way it does in the middle of the night when no one is watching. And my daughter, 9 years old in her Christmas pajamas, was fitting gears together with the focused patience of someone who simply did not accept the option of leaving unfinished. We completed it at 14 minutes past 2. Every gear seated, every joint clean. That locomotive has sat on the mantelpiece in my study ever since. Red lacquer, 14 inches long, a little worn now at the smokestack from years of being examined by curious hands. It is the first thing I look at in the morning and the last thing I see when I turn the study light off at night. Claire grew up to be a landscape architect. People see her work and think it looks natural, effortless, a path that seems to belong to the land, a garden that seems to have always been there. What they don't see is the engineering underneath, the drainage systems, the load calculations, the years of understanding how a thing has to be built before it can be made to look like it wasn't built at all. She got that from me. Not the visibility. She has always been quieter than I am, more private, but the thinking underneath. The refusal to leave a thing unfinished. She brought Marcus home 4 years ago. He was charming in the way that well-practiced people are charming. Smooth, attentive, always slightly more interested in you than you expected. A commercial real estate developer. Ambitious in a way he wore openly, like a cologne he'd chosen to make an impression. I decided to like him. For Claire's sake, I decided I should have paid closer attention to the way he looked around my home, not with warmth, but with appraisal. 18 months before that dinner, the first cracks appeared in ways small enough to excuse and regular enough to matter. That is how serious trouble usually arrives if the people causing it are intelligent. It does not burst through the front door. It tests the hinges, then learns the floor plan. Marcus began with questions that wore the clothes of ordinary conversation. We would be having coffee after dinner, or standing on the terrace after Claire stepped inside for a sweater, and he would ask what retirement looked like for a man like me. Not how I spent my mornings, not whether I missed the work. He wanted to know how I had structured things, whether I still held operating interests, whether I preferred liquidity or property, whether I had simplified my portfolio. He said portfolio the way a banker says it when he already expects an answer worth having. Light tone, precise aim, curiosity on the surface, due diligence underneath. I answered the way old men are expected to answer when younger men think they are being. Clever, vaguely, pleasantly. I spoke about travel, books, less stress, better sleep. Marcus smiled each time, but it was the smile of a man getting no usable data. Then Claire began missing our Sunday calls. Not all at once. That would have been too obvious, and Marcus was rarely obvious unless he believed he was winning. It started with a text 40 minutes late saying they were out with friends. Then a call shortened because they were on their way somewhere. Then 2 Sundays missed in 1 month, each followed by an apology that sounded like Claire and an explanation that sounded like Marcus. I could hear him in the background sometimes, supplying details she had not been given time to invent herself. Brunch had run long. Traffic was impossible. They had just sat down with his parents. Claire had never been careless with people she loved. Busy, yes. Distracted occasionally. But not careless. A few weeks later, her college friend Dana called me. Dana had the manners to sound embarrassed before saying anything useful, which is one reason I trusted her. She told me she had been at a dinner party where Marcus, 2 glasses into wine, had described me as comfortable but modest. Old pension money, nothing exciting. Dana said it lightly, as if reporting gossip she regretted hearing, but she knew me well enough to understand what mattered was not the insult. It was the categorization. Marcus was placing me in a box. Manageable father. Limited resources. No complications. I thanked her and asked no questions. If there was more, it would come later. The proposal happened 3 months after that. Claire called sounding happy, and I was happy for her. The ring was elegant. The restaurant was expensive and unimaginative. The story, as she told it, was polished in a way joy rarely is, and for the first time in her adult life, my daughter sounded as though she were reading from an occasion instead of living inside it. The engagement party confirmed what my instincts had begun arranging into a pattern. Marcus's family planned everything in his city, on his timetable, around his people. I was not seated at the family table. I was placed 2 tables away beside a judge, Marcus's dentist, and a woman who kept asking whether I was enjoying my retirement. Marcus moved through the room like a host showcasing a property. Claire, meanwhile, kept being redirected, introduced, turned, and spoken for. I said nothing to her. Not then. Not yet. I had spent 50 years learning the difference between a man who respected an asset and a man who intended to extract one. By then, when Marcus looked at Claire, I no longer saw love. I saw inventory management. The next morning, I called my attorney and told him to open a file. 6 months before that Christmas dinner, I took a trip to visit Claire and Marcus. That was what I told her on the phone, a casual visit. I missed her. The weather was supposed to be nice. I would stay in a hotel, take them to dinner, keep things easy. All of that was true. None of it was the reason I went. My attorney had recommended a financial investigator named Renata, a woman who had spent 15 years doing forensic accounting for insurance litigation before starting her own practice. She was not dramatic. She did not use words like surveillance or exposure. She simply gathered documentation, built timelines, and explained what the paper trail was telling her without editorial. I had asked her 3 months earlier to look into Marcus's professional activity, not because I had evidence of wrongdoing, but because I had evidence of a pattern, and patterns, in my experience, tend to finish what they start. We met at a coffee shop 6 blocks from Claire's apartment the morning I arrived. Renata had a folder. She placed it on the table without opening it and looked at me the way people look at you when they know the next few minutes are going to change something. She told me Marcus had incorporated a new holding company 4 months earlier. The company was registered in Claire's name. Claire was listed as the sole director. I asked whether Claire knew. Renata said Claire had signed the incorporation documents. They had been included in a stack of what Marcus described to her as joint investment disclosures, routine paperwork, the kind of thing couples sign together when they are building a life. Claire had signed without reading. Marcus had countered on that. The holding company held a single asset, a commercial property Marcus was developing on the west side of the city. Renata showed me the financials. The project was undercapitalized by nearly $2 million. Construction had stalled twice. The debt covenant attached to the primary loan was approaching a deadline Marcus could not meet, and when it breached, the lender would have the right to pursue the guarantor. The guarantor, as the named director of the holding company, was Claire. I set the paper down. I looked at the window. A woman outside was pushing a stroller. A man was unlocking a bicycle. The world was continuing in the ordinary way it does when your understanding of a situation shifts underneath you. I asked Renata one question. How long has he been planning to exit before the breach? She opened the second page of the folder. Marcus's private attorney had drafted an initial divorce filing 4 months earlier, the same month the holding company was incorporated. The same month Claire signed papers she did not understand. Marcus was not leaving because the marriage had failed. He was leaving because he needed someone to hold the liability when the project collapsed, and he needed to be legally separated from that person before the collapse became public. Claire was not his wife. She was his exit strategy. I sat with that for a long moment. Renata did not rush me. She had done this work long enough to understand that some things need time to settle before a person can decide what to do with them. I did not warn Claire that afternoon. I did not confront Marcus at dinner that night. I laughed at his jokes. I complimented his taste in restaurants. I played the role of the mildly outdated father-in-law who was glad to be included, because an interrupted scheme disappears. A completed one leaves evidence. When I returned to my hotel that evening, I called Gerald, my estate attorney of 30 years, and told him to begin a process I had been delaying for a long time. A trust restructure. A full documentation of my holdings. A legal architecture that would make certain things very clear when the time came to make them clear. Gerald asked if something had changed. I told him yes, something had. 3 weeks after I returned from that trip, I sat in my study with the door closed and the lamp on, and laid out what I knew the way I once laid out acquisition targets. Clean columns. No sentiment. What I have, what I need, what I intend. I knew Marcus had built a trap using my daughter's signature. I knew the trap had a timer attached to it, and the timer was the debt covenant deadline. I knew he had already prepared his exit, and I knew he believed he was the only person in the room who understood the shape of what was coming. I needed documentation that would hold up under legal scrutiny. I needed a clear record of what Claire had signed, when she had signed it, and what she had been told at the time. I needed the timeline of Marcus's divorce filing placed against the timeline of the projects, collapse in a way that made the intent undeniable. And I needed to know how Claire was doing without asking her directly, because the moment I asked, she would tell Marcus, and the moment she told Marcus, he would adjust. I contacted 3 people that week. Renata first. I asked her to continue and expand her documentation. Every filing Marcus made, every communication she could access through proper channels, every signature Claire's name appeared on. I told her to assume we were building something that would eventually be seen by attorneys who did not work for us. Gerald second. I told him to accelerate the trust restructuring, no more delays. I wanted the new architecture finalized before Christmas. He asked again whether something had changed, and I told him only that I had decided to stop putting off the things I should have done years ago. Dana, third, Claire's oldest friend. I called her not to report what I had found, but to ask how Claire seemed lately. Dana paused before answering. She said Claire had become harder to reach. She said Claire sounded tired in a way that was difficult to describe. She said Marcus always seemed to be nearby when they spoke. I asked Dana to keep in touch with Claire and to keep in touch with me. I did not explain why. Dana did not ask. I want to be clear about something. I did not hold back because I am cold. I held back because I have watched men react in anger before, and I've watched the anger get used against them. A confrontation gives a man like Marcus something to perform around. It lets him reframe the situation. It lets him say later that tensions were high, that emotions ran hot, that the old man never liked him. I would not give him that. I would give him what he expected. An old man fond of his daughter, perhaps a bit out of touch. Definitely not a threat. The most useful thing about real power is that you never have to announce it. 2 days later, I phoned Marcus directly. I told him I was looking forward to Christmas dinner. I told him it meant so much that the whole family would be together. He said he was looking forward to it too. The 6 weeks between that phone call and Christmas dinner were an exercise in patience, and patience, I have learned, is a skill most people confuse with waiting. They are not the same thing. Waiting is passive. Patience is watching with intent while you let the other person believe they are ahead. Marcus's colleague hosted a pre-Christmas cocktail party in early December. I attended. I arrived slightly late, wearing a coat slightly too heavy for the room, moving with the deliberate unhurriedness of a man who no longer has anywhere pressing to be. Marcus greeted me at the door with the warmth he reserved for people he considered manageable. I returned it in kind. Throughout the evening, I asked him gentle questions about real estate. How were interest rates affecting the market? What did he think about mixed-use developments? Had the city's zoning changes made things more complicated? Simple questions. The kind a retired man might ask when he wants to seem engaged but not informed. Marcus answered at length. He liked explaining things. He liked being the expert in a conversation, and I gave him every opportunity. I nodded. I asked follow-ups that invited more explanation. I allowed a pause or two that suggested I hadn't quite followed, but was too polite to say so. At one point, Marcus's father sat beside me on the sofa. A solid man, proud of his son in a way that hadn't yet been tested. He told me I must be so proud of what Marcus had built. I agreed warmly. I said I only hoped Claire was happy. Marcus appeared within seconds. He put a hand on Claire's shoulder and said she was thriving, that they were building something wonderful together, that he couldn't imagine doing any of it without her. He answered for her smoothly before she could speak. She smiled the way people smile when they have been smiled on their behalf too many times to notice anymore. I noticed. Marcus never let Claire answer questions about her own happiness. He only let her confirm his answers. Later that evening, while Marcus was across the room charming a circle of his colleagues, I found Theo standing near the bar with a glass he hadn't touched. Theo was Marcus's younger brother, quieter, less practiced. He had the face of someone carrying something he hadn't figured out how to set down. I didn't press him. I simply asked how he was doing. He looked at me for a moment with an expression I recognized, the expression of a person deciding whether honesty was safe. He said he was fine. I said that was good. I told him family events could be complicated and left space after the sentence. Theo didn't fill it, but he didn't walk away either. That told me what I needed to know. Theo knew something. He didn't like it. He wasn't ready to say it aloud, but he would remember that I had asked. The documentation arrived from Renata 3 days before Christmas. It was complete, organized, undeniable. A full paper trail showing the holding company's incorporation, the debt covenant timeline, and 3 instances where Claire's signature appeared on documents she had not been accurately informed about. One of them was clearly misdescribed, a liability assumption filed as a routine tax form. Marcus's pre-filed divorce documents sat beneath them, dated in sequence, proving the exit strategy had been in motion before Claire had any reason to suspect her marriage was ending. Gerald confirmed the second piece the same week. The trust restructure was finalized. The new architecture made explicit what had always been technically true, but never documented in terms anyone outside my legal team understood. My holdings, conservatively valued, exceeded $900 million. Claire was the sole named beneficiary under conditions that a divorcing spouse could not touch, redirect, or claim. Claire did not know the full scope of what I was worth. I had never hidden it from her exactly. I had simply never corrected the assumption that I was comfortable but modest. Marcus had operated on that same assumption. He had built his entire plan around it. He believed he was the only one at the table with hidden information. He was not. So let me take you back to that table, the candles, the wine stain spreading into the white linen, the envelope sitting beside my daughter's plate like something patient and cruel. Marcus had rehearsed his delivery. I could tell, because there were no pauses where pauses would naturally fall. He said he was sorry. He said this had been building for a while. He said he wanted what was best for Claire, and that his attorney had prepared a settlement that was more than fair. He said the word fair twice, as if repetition would make it true. He expected her to cry. I saw it in the way he held himself, braced for tears he could later describe as emotional, as proof that he had been the reasonable one. He had invited his colleague Garrett specifically to witness the moment, to confirm afterward that Marcus had handled a difficult situation with grace. But Claire did not cry. She went very still. Her hands came to rest on the table, one on each side of her plate, and her face became calm in a way that most people in the room would not have recognized. I recognized it. I had seen it 40 years earlier, at 2 a.m, when she was 9 years old and fitting the last gear into place on a painted red locomotive, because she simply would not accept the possibility of leaving a thing unfinished. She was not collapsing. She was collecting herself. Marcus finished speaking. The table was silent. He looked at me, briefly, as if expecting gratitude for the civility of his performance. I set down my fork. I dabbed my mouth with my napkin. I folded my hands in front of me and addressed the room. Not Marcus, the room. I said I had a few questions, if no one minded, about some legal documents Claire appeared to have signed recently. I mentioned the name of the holding company. I mentioned her role as director. Marcus smiled. He leaned back in his chair. He said that was a standard arrangement, that Claire had been fully informed, that it was simply how joint investments were structured. I reached beside my chair and picked up the folder I had brought with me. Everyone had assumed it held Christmas cards. It did not. I placed it on the table and slid a single document across to Marcus's father. I asked him, politely, to read page 3. The room watched him read. While he read, I explained, calmly, without accusation. I described the property, the debt covenant, the liability attached to the director's name. I explained that Marcus's attorney had filed for divorce 4 months ago, and that the filing was dated the same week Claire was asked to sign the documents she believed were tax forms. Marcus's father looked up. He did not look at me. He looked at his son. Marcus started to speak. I raised one hand, gently, the way you might quiet a child who is interrupted. I told him I thought he might have made his plans without complete information about Claire's situation. I said I would like to give him that information now. I told the table that Claire was the sole beneficiary of a trust I had finalized the previous week. I explained that the trust contained assets I had spent 50 years building and protecting. I told them that Claire's inheritance, once transferred, would place her personal net worth above anything Marcus's entire professional portfolio had ever approached. I named no number. I didn't need to. Theo stared at the tablecloth. Garrett, the colleague, stood quietly and excused himself without meeting anyone's eyes. Marcus's mother had stopped breathing in the way people do when they are waiting for something terrible to finish happening. And Marcus did not cry. He did not shout. His face did not twist into rage or collapse into grief. What happened was smaller and worse. His composure cracked the way a calculation cracks when the inputs turn out to be lies. I watched him look at Claire, then at me, then at the documents in front of his father, and I watched him try to rebuild a story that no longer had walls. He was not a man being accused. He was a man realizing he had been outprepared. In the days after Christmas, things unfolded the way serious matters usually do once the performance ends and the paperwork begins. Quietly, methodically. Much of real devastation happens in conference rooms, not dining rooms. Marcus's attorney withdrew the divorce filing as it had been drafted. That did not happen because Marcus found remorse or because anyone at that table asked for mercy. It happened because Renata's documentation made the original filing dangerous to keep on record in its existing form. The timeline was too clean. The holding company, the liability transfer, the pre-filed petition, together they did not look like a marriage dissolving. They looked like an engineered exit. Claire retained her own counsel 3 days later. Gerald recommended the firm, and for once in her adult life she took my advice without argument. I did not mistake that for surrender. It was fatigue, yes, but it was also clarity. Once the first shock had passed, she became almost unnervingly composed. She filed for divorce on her terms, through her attorney with the directorship issue named clearly and early. That question of liability became central very quickly. Claire had been listed as director of a company tied to a distressed asset she had neither controlled nor understood. 2 of the signatures attached to supporting documents were judged, at minimum, to have been procured through material misrepresentation. 1 opened a separate civil inquiry. Another created enough exposure that Marcus's legal team stopped using the phrase routine paperwork altogether. He did not go to prison. I want to be precise about that, because many people imagine justice as spectacle and handcuffs. It rarely is. Lawyers negotiate. Insurers intervene. Men with resources buy themselves softer landings than they deserve. Marcus was not poor, and he was not without counsel. But he did not leave untouched. The project was placed under a receiver and restructured. Fees multiplied. Partners distanced themselves. A lender that might have been patient under ordinary embarrassment became less patient once questions of disclosure entered the room. In his market, reputation was currency, and once it weakens, people who once praised you begin discovering scheduling conflicts. Garrett's presence at that Christmas dinner mattered more than Marcus understood. He had wanted a witness to Claire's humiliation. What he acquired was a witness to his own exposure. Word did not explode publicly. It moved the way expensive gossip moves, softly and with excellent memory. Invitations thinned. Calls returned more slowly. 1 board seat disappeared, then another prospective deal. Through all of it, Claire remained still, not numb. Not broken, still. There is a difference. Dana kept me informed when I chose not to ask questions that would make my daughter feel observed. She told me Claire never cried in front of Marcus again, not once. She handled meetings, signatures, inventory lists, attorney consultations, and the practical disassembly of a marriage with the same controlled focus she had shown that night at the table. Marcus wrote to me once near the end. A letter, not an email, as though paper could lend dignity to nonsense. He said I had manipulated a family moment for revenge. He accused me of humiliating him in front of people whose opinion mattered. That phrase told me everything, not what he had done. Not what Claire had nearly been made to carry, whose opinion mattered. I read the letter once, folded it, and placed it in the file Gerald had opened months earlier. I did not respond. A man who has never been held accountable before always believes that accountability, when it finally arrives, is someone else's aggression toward him. That was 8 months ago. Here is where things stand now. Claire is working again. Not surviving work, not enduring it, working in the way she worked before Marcus, with the focused absorption of someone who has remembered what they are actually good at. She took on a public garden installation in a mid-sized city 3 states away. She described it to me on the phone as the most complicated drainage problem she had ever chosen voluntarily, and the way she said it made me laugh in a way I had not laughed in some time. Our Sunday calls have returned to what they once were. She rings on time. There is no background noise. There is no voice behind hers supplying details she hasn't had time to invent. There is only my daughter talking to me the way she talked to me before someone spent 2 years teaching her to make herself smaller. The red locomotive is no longer on my mantelpiece. She took it on a visit a few months ago. She didn't ask, and she didn't explain. She simply picked it up, turned it over in her hands the way she used to when she was small, and placed it carefully in her bag. I watched her do it and said nothing. Some things don't require commentary. Some things you simply let happen and feel grateful that they can. My own life has grown quieter in the way I find I prefer. Smaller dinners, longer mornings, more chess, less finance. I read in the evenings now with the kind of attention I used to reserve for balance sheets. Gerald calls occasionally with administrative matters. Renata sends a card at the new year. Dana, I am told, had lunch with Claire last month and reported that she seemed, and I'm using Dana's word, luminous. That is enough. Now, I want to speak to you directly for a moment, if you'll allow it. I do not know what brought you to this story. Perhaps you recognize something in it. Perhaps someone you trusted turned out to be conducting a quiet audit of your life without your knowledge. Perhaps you have sat at a table and felt the room shift in a way no one else seemed to notice. If so, I want to leave you with the things I know to be true. The most dangerous assumption a greedy person makes is that silence is the same as ignorance. Real security isn't what you display. It's what you've already arranged. Protect quietly, reveal precisely. And never mistake a patient person for a passive one. People who watch carefully tend to find each other, I have noticed, across considerable distances. You found this. That tells me something about you. If this story is one someone in your life needs to hear, pass it along. You'll know who. And if you found it worthwhile, a like or a subscription costs you nothing and means more than you might think. I'll be here. Thank you for watching carefully.